Tessa's fingers flew over the phone's keyboard in an angry storm. She listed every good thing about Ethan Hale and Justin Anderson and compared the two. She then listed all the bad qualities of the two men. Ethan Hale had been labeled as the villain in the novel she had just finished reading, which he technically was, but he had met a bad ending. That was something that she couldn't sit with. Ethan Hale was a rich asshole and one that she had grown to love. He had been her favorite character. Tessa set her phone down in a huff after she finished typing everything out. She stood up from her seat on the couch and decided to grab something to snack on. She didn't have any. Grabbing her phone, she put on her shoes and left to head to the market by her apartment. Tessa took the outside stairwell for some fresh air. When she reached halfway down, the clear night sky turned dark and it opened up, releasing a torrential downpour. Rain poured down on her, soaking through her clothes. She turned to head toward a door that would lead inside the apartment building, but lightning struck down right in front of her. The white blue light struck the step right in front of her foot. Tessa dodged on impulse. Her foot slipped on the slick step and she fell backwards. Her hands flung out to reach for the railing, but her hand was unable to grasp a firm hold on the slick wet steel. Her ankle twisted and her shoulder banged against a step as her body tumbled down. Her head struck against the bottom step and pain exploded and a bright white light bloomed behind her eyes before everything turned black. "Young miss." An unfamiliar voice called out, bringing Tessa out of her blank state. Tessa's eyes fluttered before opening. A groan ripped out of her as the bright light assaulted her tender eyes. "Young miss." The unfamiliar voice said again, but more excited as it grew in volume. A not-so-unfamiliar pain exploded through her head as memories that were not her own flooded through her. Tessa blacked out once again. She woke up later to the sound of hushed voices surrounding her, almost overpowering the sound of a beeping monitor. She recognized 3 of the people from the memories that she had gained. There was a young woman around her original age. Tessa recognized her as being this body's personal maid. The other 2 faces she recognized were this body's biological parents. And the body that Tessa was currently in belonged to Leilani Drevis, the only daughter of Leilani Drevis and Kristen Drevis. Leilani Drevis was a rising business tycoon, while Kristen Drevis was a well-known painter. "Layla, dear, how are you feeling?" Kristen asked, worry etched deep in her eyes. Tessa looked at them for a moment, tears threatening to well up in her eyes. She had been orphaned since the age of 18 when her parents died in a car accident, so it was like she got a second chance. "I'm fine. Everything just feels a little fuzzy," Tessa admitted. Kristen took her hand in her own. "That's fine, dear. If anything is too fuzzy, you can just ask us about it," she said in a soft, slightly broken voice that shook at Tessa's heart. A week passed after that. Tessa slowly got used to Leilani's memories as she combed through them whenever she was alone. Her new parents had her stay home to recovery instead of returning to school. Which was fine with Tessa since she really didn't want to experience college life again, especially so soon after waking up inside of a body that wasn't her own. Though, it was a good thing that Leilani was majoring in the same field Tessa had done in her past life, which meant that hopefully the classes will be easier for her this time around. Apparently, Leilani had been in a car accident, which was why she had woken up in the hospital surrounded by everyone. She was just happy that she could return home, well, to the Drevis' home after 3 days of staying in the hospital. The Drevis' home was a nice 2-story home with an outside pool and a large garden. It was small if one compared the money that they made, but it was still quite large compared to the houses around them. Tessa stayed home, cooped up in her room while sometimes moving around the house and the garden. Her body was sore and bruised, and it ached when she moved too much, but at least she was alive, even if she was no longer Tessa Morgan, but Leilani Drevis. During that time, Kristen stayed with her every day while Lonnie stayed home most of those days, only leaving when an important meeting he couldn't reschedule came up. It was a surreal feeling, having parents again. As Tessa Morgan, she had gone 5 years without having anyone to lean on. When the week was finally over and Tessa was well enough that she could move without hurting, she went back to school. She easily navigated the campus, finding her lecture halls all thanks to Leilani's memories. She was walking down a wide pathway when someone shouted for her to get out of the way. Tessa looked back to find a man on a skateboard heading straight for her. She quickly stepped out of the way, moving too fast for her sore ankles to keep up. She stumbled, barely managing to keep herself up. With a sigh of relief, Tessa readjusted the strap on her bag and made her way to class. It was a general math class, one that was required for everyone to take. She walked into the room and was instantly swarmed by unfamiliar yet familiar faces. "How are you feeling?" One person asked. Are you sure you should be back so soon? Another asked. Leilani, come grab lunch with us after class, a girl said, standing off to the side with two others. Sure, Tessa answered, having an hour gap between classes after this one. After class ended, which left Tessa with an extremely stiff back, the same three girls who invited her to have lunch with them made their way over to her. They were girls who weren't exactly friends with the original Leilani, but because they all had similar majors, they shared a lot of classes together, and had become somewhat friendly acquaintances. The four girls made their way out of the sprawling lecture hall, and walked down the large staircase, heading out the main doors. They were making their way to the street to cross when a very expensive car pulled up. The pearl paint shone beautifully in the morning light. The driver's side door swung up and the first thing Tessa saw were long slender legs clad in a soft-looking fabric that shimmered faintly with each movement. Then a slender, tapered waist followed by slender yet broad shoulders. Then a chiseled face with sharp features, dark eyes, and silky black hair. Oh my, one of the girls beside her gasped. Tessa agreed, the guy before them deserved that gasp. Ethan Hale is dressed so simply today, another girl gasped. That casual outfit still costs more than everything we are wearing combined, said the first girl. But Tessa was hardly paying attention. They had just called that man Ethan Hale. That was the same name as her favorite character from the last novel she had read. And this man kind of looked like the Ethan Hale that was described in the novel. The Ethan Hale before them shut the car door and with a blank face that looked slightly cold, walked over to them, working on moving past them. Wow, Tessa breathed out. It didn't matter if this Ethan Hale was the same one from the book. The only thing that mattered was how hot this Ethan Hale was. Tessa's feet moved on her own and she only came to after she had already grabbed a hold of his shirt sleeve. Wow, Tessa repeated. You're so hot. Do you want to date me? Tessa asked, too stunned by what she had said to even feel embarrassed. Cold dark eyes stared down at her. That one look was all she needed before she removed her hand from his shirt. Nothing was said between the two of them before Ethan Hale walked away. As soon as he was gone, the three girls that were with Tessa instantly surrounded her. I can't believe you did that, Leilani, said one girl. I wish I was that brave, said another. Even that cold look was hot, exclaimed the third. It was then that Tessa realized that Ethan Hale was the campus local heartthrob. And apparently, an unattainable one. The four of them made their way to the cafeteria all while still talking about Ethan Hale. Tessa had to admit that this Ethan Hale's background and character were similar to the Ethan Hale of the book. They found seats among the crowd, and during that time, Tessa finally figured out their names. Jules, Sarah, and Emily. As they were eating, a man with snow-white hair and purple eyes walked past. Tessa found herself gawking, not because of how handsome the man was but because of how strange his features were. That's Justin Anderson, Emily told her when she saw Tessa staring at the white-haired boy. Justin Anderson, that's the name of the male lead from the novel, Tessa thought to herself. She couldn't help but find it strange to not run into just one person but two that shared the same names of the main characters from the same novel. Is this really just a coincidence? Tessa wondered. But if it's not, then wouldn't the female lead of the novel also exist? So, I've also heard about Alyra Evans, Tessa began, leaving her sentence open. The three girls with her perked up. Who hasn't heard about her? Even though she is in a different department, she quickly became popular with everyone, Emily said. Yeah. She's apparently the top student in her department and she comes from a wealthy family. Her family isn't quite on the same level as Ethan Hale's, but I don't think they're that far behind, Jules explained. Tessa quietly took in their words while feeling grim on the inside. So, she apparently had transliterated into the novel. It was the next day and Tessa had just left her class. She was still feeling disconnected as her thoughts still reeled from the fact that she was now inside a novel. She was making her way to her next lecture when she noticed a familiar car parked in front of the library. Tessa checked the time and decided that she could spare 10 minutes. If she truly was inside the novel, then she could at least go admire her favorite character. Before she had even made it through the library doors, she bumped into a tall and solid-built figure, causing her to totter one step back. A firm yet cold hand grabbed her by the wrist to steady her. Tessa looked up, ready to apologize since it was technically her fault for not paying attention, but then stopped. Standing before her was Ethan Hale, and he looked just as cold and dashing as he had the day before. Actually, seeing him made Tessa want to curse out the author, because they had described the way Ethan Hale looked, but had not done the man any justice whatsoever. Before her brain could catch up, her body and mouth acted on their own. She grabbed Ethan's wrist before he could pull away. You never answered me yesterday. Will you go out with me? The words rolled off of Tessa's tongue before she could stop them. Was this how she was when faced with a god-tier handsome face? Or was this reaction strictly because he was the Ethan Hale, the very one she had wanted to have a happy ending in the novel? Ethan looked down at her with furrowed brows, but that was the only reaction his face showed. You cannot handle dating me, Ethan said, his facial expression still cold. Tessa's hand flinched around Ethan's, but it wasn't out of fear, it was simply because of how good his voice sounded. Before Tessa could gather her scattered thoughts, Ethan Hale had already removed her hand from his wrist and made his way down the library steps. By the time Tessa had come to her senses, 10 minutes had already passed by since she had first ran into Ethan. With a hurried step, she made her way to the lecture hall, arriving right before the teaching assistant had begun the lecture. Tessa arrived home, her chest and legs aching from when she had forced herself to walk fast earlier that day. Are you all right, Leilani? Her mother asked, her lips pulled down in a worried frown, and her brows furrowed slightly. I'm fine, Tessa said, and that was true, she was fine for the most part. Her mother waves her over, guiding her to a seat. If it's still hard for you to attend your classes, let me know and I'll talk to your school for you, her mother offered. Tessa smiled and patted her mother's hands. Really, I am fine. It's still a little hard for me to move, it really is okay.
2 days passed by before Tessa got another chance to see Ethan. But it wasn't at the campus where she saw him. Since she had been feeling better, she had agreed to go to the mall with Jules and Emily. Sarah was unable to go with them because she had to work at her part-time job. Tessa sighed inwardly since her own imprisonment was closing in on her. She had her own internship at her father's company, in the design department as a graphic designer. The three girls walked around the mall, trying on outfits from different stores, and buying anything that smelled good to eat. Tessa was walking slightly behind the others, looking into the passing windows while eating a soft pretzel. She had only been half paying attention to her surroundings when she bumped into someone. Her foot twisted to the side and the pretzel started to slip from her hand. She tightened her grip on the pretzel to stop it from falling. At the same time, a strong hand reached out and steadied her, since it seemed that her focus was on the food and not on her footing. She looked up to thank him, and her mouth made an O shape when she saw those familiar dark eyes. This is the third time. Are you sure you don't want to date me? Tessa asked Ethan. Ethan's cold and unmoving face remained the same as it always was, but his eyes scanned her foot for a second before going back up to her eyes. I'm starting to think you are doing this on purpose, he said in that deep and seductive voice. Aren't you the one purposely running into me? I've been distracted both times, so there was no way I knew I was running into you, Tessa pointed out, a small smirk raising the corners of her lips. Ethan's lips twitched down minutely and he said nothing. Tessa leaned forward, her smirk widening. Oh, does the young master have nothing to say to that? She teased him, her voice light. Was it a good idea to tease someone who was described as being cold and vicious, and a literal villain in a novel? Probably not. But was it fun? Absolutely. Ethan Hale looked away, his lips no longer twitching. Without saying anything, he walked away. After he left, Tessa noticed Emily and Jules looking at her with knowing expressions. Tessa said nothing as she walked over to them. It seems our Lele likes the cold ones, Jules teased her. Or maybe it's just the handsome ones, Emily said. The three of them were heading toward the exit of the mall. Each of them carried bags of the things they had bought. Sarah will be sad she missed this, Emily said, enjoying the fact that Leilani was the one who had paid for today's outing. Oh, Jules said when the strap on her sandal broke. Emily stops to help her. Tessa had taken a step forward before realizing that the two of them had stopped. As she was looking back at the girls, she heard the sound of speeding tires. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a black car speeding her way, uncaring that they were in a parking lot. Before she could take a step back, a strong arm wrapped around her waist and pulled her back. Tessa's back slams into a hard chest. She looks up in a daze to find Ethan glaring at the speeding car. Ethan? The name slips out of her as shock fills her. What was he doing here? Didn't they just run into each other a half hour ago? Are you all right, Leilani? Emily asked. Jules hobbled behind her without her shoes on. Both girls check her over as soon as Ethan lets her go. Yeah, I'm fine, Tessa answered belatedly as her eyes followed Ethan's cold form as he left them behind, a small black bag in his hand. Ethan walked into the mall after receiving the call from his secretary informing him that his meeting with Chad Zinger, the CEO of the Zenator Group, had been moved to an earlier date. And that was the reason why Ethan was now walking into the mall. He was there to prepare a suitable gift for Mr. Zinger for their future collaboration. He could have sent his secretary to pick something out, but he wanted to do it himself. He was still new to running his own company and was fervent in his want to take care of most matters himself. It was sort of his way to proving himself to his father, who owned 12 separate companies. As Ethan was browsing the shop windows, he felt someone bump into him. He reached out automatically to steady the poor girl. Looking down, he realized that the girl who had bumped into him was the same golden retriever-like girl who had impulsively asked him out twice before. She was looking up at him with wide eyes, her eyes widening even more as she frantically tried to catch the soft baked pretzel that she had been eating. Her brown eyes sparkled with a golden light when she successfully caught the pretzel. Ethan had to suppress a snort at her behavior. He had never seen someone more worried about food over their own health. She truly was very dog-like in looks and behavior. She looked up at him then and recognition flashed across her face. This is the third time. Are you sure you don't want to date me? She asked, a small mischievous smile curving her petal-like lips. Ethan stared down at her, his lips resisting the urge to twitch. This was the third time that this girl had so brazenly asked him out. I'm starting to think you are doing this on purpose, Ethan said in response to her earlier confession. Did she have ulterior motives, or was she after his looks or his wealth? He had been approached many of times for all three of those reasons. She continued to stare up at him, that mischievous smile of hers widening. He watched as her lashes fluttered, the soft baked pretzel still in her hand. Aren't you the one purposely running into me? I've been distracted both times, so there was no way I knew I was running into you. Ethan listened to her words and realized that there was some truth hidden in them. She had indeed been distracted 2 out of the 3 times that they had run into each other. Instead of confirming her words, he left. He still needed to find a gift for Mr. Zinger. Ethan found the perfect gift not long after leaving the golden retriever-like girl. As he was heading toward the south exit where he parked, a white dress that had a low neckline and a split up the side caught his eye. The material looked like a fine, imported fabric that shimmered beautifully. For some reason, the image of the dog-lime girl came to his mind. He had a feeling that the dress would look good on her. He found himself staring at it for a while. Against his better judgment, he walked into the boutique. He walked around, only giving cursory glances at the dresses. Even at a glance he could tell that all of them were good quality. And he had found 2 others that would suit the dog-like girl really well. He visibly sighed, wondering what was wrong with him. He didn't have the time or luxury to be doing pointless things like this. He left the shop and headed toward the exit near where he parked. Outside, further ahead of him, was a familiar girl bent over fixing her shoe with another familiar girl standing beside her. If he remembered correctly, they were with the dog-like girl in the mall earlier. As soon as he had that thought, his eyes drifted up until they landed on a familiar white dress. The dog-like girl was standing in the parking lot, looking away from them. That was when Ethan heard it. The sounds of tires on pavement. He looked over to find a car speeding toward the girl at nearly triple the speed. Ethan ran forward without a second thought and grabbed the slender arm of the girl and pulled her to him. Her back slammed into his chest and a small, startled sound escaped her lips. Why had she just been standing there? When she pulled away from him, that was when he saw it. Just below the neckline of her dress, hidden behind the white material, was a large purple bruise. His eyes scanned down, and he noticed some small yellowish-green bruises peppered along her legs and a slightly reddening mark on her ankle. The mark on her ankle looked fresh, but the others looked older by a week or maybe even 2. Was she being abused at home? No, she wouldn't have been wearing such light and revealing dresses if that were the case. Had she been in an accident? Why was he even worried? She had nothing to do with him except for the fact she attended the same university. Just then the two girls who had been with her screamed and ran over. Ethan took that chance to slip away. He made it back to his car, his mind preoccupied with thoughts that had no business being there. Thrumming his fingers against the steering wheel, he decided to call his secretary. Find any information on a girl who attends the academy with me who may have been in a recent accident. The week ended without much incident and the weekend soon came around. Tessa looked in the mirror as she fixed her hair. The bruises that had peppered her skin were either light in color or almost gone. After making sure everything looked good, she left her room and met her parents downstairs. They were planning on going out to eat instead of staying in. It had been her dad's idea and Tessa was looking forward to it. This family was well off, so they probably ate at better restaurants than what she could have afforded in her last life, at least. That's what it looked like according to the memories of the original owner. You look beautiful in that dress, her mother said, a warm smile on her lips. Thank you. You look beautiful as well, mother. Mr. Drevis looked upon the two of them with a fond smile. The three of them left after that. The restaurant they arrived at was a sleek, glass pavilion with a modern design. The tables were spaced far enough apart to give a sense of isolation, or at least that if one were to talk in a normal voice then the table nearest them would be unable to overhear. The server led them to a table, one that Mr. Davis had made in advance. The three of them made light conversation over a deliciously prepared meal. After they were done eating and before dessert came out, Tessa made her way to the restroom. After washing her hands, she stood in front of the mirror for a few seconds. Her body, which had been healing quite well, had been feeling stiff ever since her trip to the mall. As she came out of the restroom, she ran into someone who was turning down the corridor. The person she ran into had a tall, solid figure. It was a figure that she was familiar with. She looked up at the figure and saw familiar dark eyes staring down at her. A smile instantly formed as she stared up at the cold and handsome face that belonged solely to Ethan Hale. Tessa felt her heart skip a beat as she stared at that flawless skin. Ooh. Does this count as the fourth or fifth time? Are you sure you don't want to go out with me? The words spilled out of her mouth before she could stop them. Why was she always like this whenever she saw his handsome face? Ethan Hale's cold, marble-like lips twitched minutely. Was that a good thing or a bad thing for Tessa? And what brings Miss Davis here? Ethan asked, using her name for the first time. Sort of. Her cheeks flushed with a faint pink color. I'm here to have dinner with my family. You? Tessa asked after answering him. Ethan slowly removed his hand from where it rested on her from when he had stopped her from falling. A business meeting, he answered smoothly. Business meeting? Tessa screamed internally. It was the weekend, why was he having a business meeting on the weekend? Or was it one of those meetings, the kind where he was forced into an arranged marriage? But was Ethan Hale ever forced into an arranged marriage in the novel? But Tessa never had the chance to ask him. Ethan had left her after that. Monday came to Tessa's dismay. She still couldn't believe that she had to relive college all over again. It was also growing closer to the time when she would enter her father's company. Would it be too much to ask for a hot and capable lover who could help with her father's company? Someone like Ethan Hale? Tessa released a heavy sigh, realizing that she would probably have a hard time finding anyone after seeing that cold and handsome face. Ever since seeing his face, every other face had looked like squids to her. Tessa knew that she had a thing for good-looking faces, but she had no clue that it was this bad. She sighed once again, not paying attention to her surroundings as she dragged her feet across the campus. What is you down? A voice asked. Oh. I think I have a problem. I want to find a capable lover, but everyone looks like squids now, Tessa answered without thinking. And here I thought you wanted me as a lover, came an amused voice. Those words hit Tessa at the same time as recognition did. She spun toward the voice, eyes wide. She breathed out when she saw Ethan standing there. You are the reason for my problems. You're too handsome. Now everyone looks like a squid. The accusations tumbled out of her mouth, falling like word vomit, something that she was finding out that happened quite frequently around him. Ethan looked down at her, and this time she didn't imagine it. His lips twitched upward minutely. That sounds like a you problem, Miss Davis. His voice wasn't quite as cold and detached as normal. Tessa took note of the small change but didn't say anything. Instead, she nodded, agreeing with his words. It is. Though you could easily fix it for me by agreeing to go out with me, Tessa said, her eyes never leaving Ethan. Ethan's eyes drifted over her face in a detached, lazy way. It was such a slow and unhurried action, but it sent a flutter in her chest. Again, that sounds like a you problem, Ethan repeated. He really doesn't like hearing her ask him out, does he? Tessa thought to herself. Before Tessa could say anything else, Ethan left. She watched as his tall, firm back moved farther away from her. Tessa suppressed her defeated sigh, feeling slightly disappointed in herself for her lack of restraint. Pushing the slightly embarrassing conversation to the back of her mind, Tessa readjusted the strap on her bag before taking off, heading to the other side of the campus to the class that she was undoubtedly going to be late for. Unbeknownst to either Tessa or Ethan, a third party had been watching the scene unfold. And it was not the first time that this third party had witnessed the unusual exchange between them. Tessa sat outside on one of the campus' many terraces. A latte and a small chocolate brownie sat on the table in front of her. Her focus was on neither but on the book that lay between them. She had roughly 40 minutes until her next class, which wasn't enough time to head home. She leaned over the table, working on the assignment from her prior class. She absent-mindedly grabbed the brownie and took a bite. By the time 30 minutes had passed, Tessa had already finished the brownie and the assignment. She packed up her things and made her way to the lecture hall where her next class was being held. On her way there, a girl with long curly blonde hair and blue eyes accidentally bumped into her. I'm sorry, the girl apologized. It's fine, Tessa replied, wanting to hurry up to her next class before she was considered late. Tessa left the girl behind, not paying attention to the cold and icy look in her clear blue eyes. Tessa arrived at her class before the professor did. The lecture went quickly and smoothly. She grabbed her belongings and left the room with the others. She was finally done with classes for the day. Just as she was heading to the bus stop that she rode 5 days a week, a sleek red car stopped in front of her. The driver's side window rolled down to reveal Ethan's cold, sharp profile. Miss Davis. Get in. Tessa was confused, but she did not hesitate. It was Ethan Hale. The cold, charismatic, and extremely hot villain. She would follow him pretty much anywhere. Tessa opened up the passenger door and slid in, quickly shutting the door and buckling her seatbelt before Ethan could change his mind. Ethan stared over at her, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. What? She asked. Ethan looked away and put the car in drive before answering her. You need to be more guarded. What if I were planning on kidnapping you? Ethan said, his tone cold but not quite as detached sounding as normal. Then kidnap me, Tessa answered. If it's you, then I don't mind, she said with complete seriousness. And Tessa internally scolded herself for her weakness of handsome faces. Ethan said nothing, acting as if he had not heard her words, or probably deciding that they weren't important enough to pay attention to. So where are we going? Tessa asked after a stretch of silence passed, somehow not uncomfortable, just quiet. Ethan released a chuckle, immediately sending butterflies fluttering low in her stomach. I've thought it over. Your words earlier hold true, so I thought I would treat you to dinner. His words had Tessa sitting rigid and heart pounding wildly. But only one. It will be up to you, and if you can hold my attention long enough for a second date. Tessa's mouth flopped open and a light blush dusted her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The cold and detached Ethan had actually agreed to go out with her. Had all of her begging and light teasing actually worked? She turned wide eyes onto Ethan, who was focused on the road ahead of them. Her tongue darted out to wet her dry lips before she spoke. Okay. She agreed with unabashed enthusiasm. With quick movements, Tessa brought her phone out from where it lay nestled in her bag. She sent a quick text to her parents to let her know that she would be back later and to eat without her. Ethan quietly drove the car, his eyes never leaving the road. Tessa, on the other hand, sat in her seat, twitching in nervous excitement. Before long, Ethan pulled the car to a stop in front of a small restaurant that had vines creeping up the front. Tessa followed Ethan inside. She still couldn't believe that this was happening. And it must have shown on her face. One side of Ethan's lip twitched upward. What? He asked, his voice somehow confident and cocky, and if that tone of voice had come from anyone else, she would have punched them. I still can't believe that this is happening, Tessa admitted. Isn't this what you wanted? Ethan asked, though it sounded more like a statement than an actual question. Tessa grinned, leaning into the table. It is. It's just surprising. You are so cold and aloof that it almost seems impossible to score a date with you. Tess internally winced at her words, regretting her lack of restraint when it came to this man. But the regret did not last long. A low yet melodious sound escaped from Ethan's sculpted lips. He is laughing, Tessa thought in amazement, feeling stunned and proud at the same time. Normally it would be impossible, Ethan admitted once he was done laughing. But it seems I have a fondness for golden retrievers. Golden retrievers? Tessa thought in confusion. What do dogs have to do with him accepting my confession? And then realization struck her. Her eyes narrowed, the soft brown of them sparking with an angry golden color. You just called me a dog, Tessa accused, sounding more annoyed than what she actually felt. I did, Ethan said calmly, his expression unchanging and unbothered. Well, I guess there was a reason the novel described him as being a rich asshole. Tessa hummed internally with discontent. The food came out after that, and any kind of anger or annoyance that Tessa had been feeling disappeared as she watched Ethan eat in quiet elegance. The smile that had appeared during dinner still stayed naturally on her face even long after Ethan had dropped her off at her house. It only dimmed when she remembered his earlier words. The words had stated that she needed to earn the second date herself. But she wasn't sure on how she was supposed to do that. Should she just continue acting as she had been? It was the next day and Tessa had just climbed off the bus at one of the campus bus stops. A girl with beautiful pale and unblemished skin came running up to her with a worried expression. Her blue eyes were wide and panicked-looking. Can you help me? She asked after glancing around and only finding Tessa at the stop. What is it? Tessa asked, feeling concerned over the girl's practically hysteric state. I was walking my dog along the bridge when their leash snapped. They fell down the slope and I can't get to them. The girl spoke rapidly, her tone heavy and thick with unshed tears. Lead me there, Tessa said, her heart clenching. The girl took off, leading Tessa slightly down the walkway before veering onto the jogging path that ran along the bridge just a little further down from where they were. Where is the dog? Tessa asked, not seeing any sign of a poor and helpless canine anywhere. It was then that she realized that she had not seen the girl carrying a broken leash, nor was there one laying discarded in the grass. You. Tessa never got to finish her words when she felt a strong arm come up and wrapped around her neck. The damp cloth was then pressed against her mouth and nose. Realizing what was happening, Tessa immediately held her breath, trying not to breathe in the fumes, but failing miserably at it. Ethan left the office building, heading straight to the campus. He only had one class that evening, but it was one he was looking forward to since he usually wound up running into Miss Davis on his way. He slid his car into an empty space, his eyes automatically scanning the crowd for that familiar head of blonde hair. He was unaware that he had even been doing it. You still cannot get a hold of her. The voice floated to his ears, sounding vaguely familiar. Ethan looked toward the voice and found the girls that seemed to be around Miss Davis 40% of the time. Without a second thought, Ethan walked over to them. Excuse me, he called out in a determined and even tone. His voice was quiet but commanding. Have any of you seen Miss Davis? I have something I wish to discuss with her. The three girls look at each other before one of them finally steps forward and begins to speak. Leilani never showed up for any of her classes today, and we cannot get a hold of her. Another girl steps forward. I called her mom and found out that Leilani left like normal. Their words sink in, and a heavy uneasiness settles in his chest. It was probably nothing, but there was a chance that it could be something. Thank you. He turned away and took out his phone. Making a quick phone call, he called out a few simple commands. Ethan headed back to his car, instead of heading to the lecture hall. He slid into the seat and drove off after buckling up. He pulled out onto the highway, heading to the police station to call upon one of his father's acquaintances. Tessa groaned aloud. Her head pounded and her lungs burned. Her eyes slowly opened, though they were heavy and scraped like sandpaper. She groaned again as she struggled to raise her head. Her temples pounded, keeping a loud rhythm that competed with her heartbeat. Her body felt heavy, and when she tried to move her arms, she found that they were tied at the wrists. I am tied up, Tessa thought with blank confusion. That was when she realized that she was laying on the cold, hard floor, and it wasn't just her wrists tied but her ankles as well. She slowly opened her eyes and waited for them to adjust. When they did, she noticed that she was in an enclosed building. The windows were boarded up and there was a thick layer of dust coating everything. It was thick enough that it tickled her nose every time she breathed. Slowly, very slowly, she sat up. It had been harder to do than she thought possible, but it made sense since she couldn't use her arms or legs properly with them tied. Tessa wanted to try to stand but decided against it. Her head still pounded and she felt disoriented. Trying to stand now would probably only cause her to fall over. So she waited. She sat still as she slowly swiveled her head around the room to look for anything useful. Cobweb. Another cobweb. A cobweb with a spider dangling from it. A small pebble, one that would probably be annoying if it was ever inside a shoe. A small rusted nail. Tessa's eyes darted back to that last object so fast that her vision turned black. When it returned, she stared long and hard at the boarded-up windowsill, taking in the small and abandoned nail sitting on the ledge. The windowsill was on the complete opposite end of the room. Tessa took in a few deep breaths while trying not to sneeze. Then, very slowly, she tried to stand. She lost her balance before she could stand up to her full height. She landed on the dusty floor with a thud and a rising plume of dust. Okay, maybe she should try a different approach. So instead, she slid across the floor, using her legs to propel herself forward. It took time. After what felt like a long while, she finally made it to the windowsill. Her arms and legs where they were bare were now covered in scrapes, and the bruises that had started to heal were starting to appear once again, but she had made it. She raised her arms up and grabbed a hold of the ledge of the window and pulled herself up. Tessa's arms complained and her ribs complained. She clutched the nail in her trembling hands before she sunk down onto the ground. She looked down at the nail, now hitting a nail in the road. She had something useful, but she didn't know exactly what to do with the nail. It wouldn't be efficient to cut the ropes with. Maybe she could keep it hidden on her in case her kidnappers showed up. But wouldn't it be better if they never showed up? And as Tessa was thinking this, she realized that she had yet to try the door. Tessa groaned out loud, and very loudly at that. She could have smacked herself in the head at that moment if her arms hadn't been so sore. At that moment, the door opened and in walked a very familiar and very beautiful girl. It was the same girl who had used the dog trick on her. The girl smiled upon seeing Tessa sitting on the floor. Without drawing too much attention to her hands, Tessa slowly hid the nail, sliding it in between her wrists where they were bound. "Why are you doing this?" Tessa asked, trying to keep the girl's eyes on her face instead of on Tessa's very slowly moving hands. The girl's smile twisted and her blue eyes turned even colder. "You have been getting too close to Ethan Hale. For some odd reason, he allowed for someone like you to approach him," the girl practically spit out. "Wait, I'm here because this girl has a crazy obsession over Ethan." Actually, that somehow makes sense, Tessa thought, nodding internally to herself as she digested the girl's spiteful words. But still, even if her words made sense, it was still a little strange that this suddenly jumped to kidnapping. Wasn't jumping straight to kidnapping a bit of a stretch? Or was Tessa the only normal person here? The blue-eyed girl's twisted smile widened into something less twisted and more peaceful looking. That instantly sent a cold shiver down Tessa's spine. She had a bad feeling about that smile. The door opened up again and two guys entered. Since she is finally awake, do whatever you want to her, the blue-eyed girl told the two men. She then turned and walked out of the door, which had been left slightly ajar up until that point, ever since the girl had first entered. The two men moved closer to Tessa. She moved her fingers to the tip of the nail, ready to pull it out and plunge it into one of their eyes when they were near enough. Right before the men could reach her, a shrill scream came from outside. The men froze and simultaneously looked toward the door. Before the scream could even die down, the door swung open hard enough that the hinges rattled. Tessa's eyes widened and the grip she had on the nail loosened when she saw Ethan Hale striding in through the door with a stormy look on his usually stoic face. Behind him were two heavily armed police officers. Before anyone could blink, Ethan kicked the nearest man, sending him flying. Tessa found her jaw going slack at the show of force. She had never thought that Ethan could be physically strong enough to actually hold up in a fight. Though it did make sense. It was typical for the male leads and the main villains to be able to fight like pros in novels. It felt like seconds when everything was over. The police officers had the two men cuffed and on the ground, and Ethan was kneeling down in front of Tessa, cutting the ropes around her wrists and ankles. He then drapes his jacket over her shoulders. "Can you stand?" he asked her. Tessa placed her hand in the one he held out to her and tried to stand. Her legs wobbled underneath, and she felt like a fawn standing for the very first time. The corners of Ethan's mouth twitched down, and that was all the warning she had before he slid an arm around her back and one behind her knees. In one fluid motion, Ethan picked her up and carried her bridal style. Everything moved quickly after that. The police took her statement before sending her to the hospital. Her parents arrived by the time the ambulance had gotten there. Ethan had apparently called them to inform them of the situation. In less than 1 month of transmigrating, Tessa had found herself staying in the hospital a total of 2 times. She was discharged from the hospital on the second day. And on the third day, after being saved, the university called to let her know that the school would provide the tuition needed until graduation for the incident she had faced while on campus grounds. It wasn't as if it was needed, but it was a small win that she willingly took. On the 4th day, she finally met Ethan again. He had shown up after her class and offered to take her out to dinner, which had apparently counted as their second date. During their meal, Tessa had learned from Ethan about what happened to Serena Blake, the name of the girl who was responsible for kidnapping her. She found out that Ethan had personally led the charge and used the stock market to completely ruin the Blake family while also having the Hale's personal lawyer take Tessa's case, which she had been unaware of, and somehow gotten the maximum sentence issued to Serena voted on, and even won. Tessa had jokingly called Ethan a villain at that point, which he then replied with that if it was to save his puppy, then he would gladly become the villain. Tessa didn't pout this time when he had once again compared her to a dog. 4 months passed and Tessa found herself interning at her father's company, thankful that it had been pushed back slightly after that rough first month that she had. During those 4 months, Ethan had gone from the cold and distant guy to the try to win him over for just one more date to finally a boyfriend. Yep, that's right, Tessa finally scored him as her boyfriend, which had made her dad's year. Tessa walked out of her father's company, ready to hitch a ride home with Jim when Ethan pulled into the parking lot near them. "I'm stealing Leilani," Ethan informed her father before whisking Tessa away. "Where are we going?" she asked, her hair blowing in the wind from the rolled-down window. "You will see when we get there," Ethan said with a small smirk.